Hello there and a very warm welcome to this Chorley election debate for 2024, brought to you by the Local Democracy Reporting Service. It's where we put the politicians on the spot over the big issues facing the borough ahead of this year's local elections on Thursday, the 2nd of May. Quick public service announcement: if you're voting in person, don't forget to take your voter ID. Now, there are 5 parties vying for your votes across Chorley this year. The Labour, Conservative and Green parties are contesting all 14 wards across the borough, while the Liberal Democrats and the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition are standing in 4 wards each. All of them are invited to take part in the debate on that basis. Unfortunately, the Liberal Democrats were unable to make it. However, you can find out what they're promising, and indeed all of the political parties locally here in Chorley, by checking out their mini manifestos, which we've compiled into a handy guide for you, a link to which can be found somewhere within the vicinity of wherever you may be watching this video. But for now, all that remains is for me to welcome the ruling Labour group leader of Chorley Council, Alistair Bradley, Alan Cullens, the Conservative opposition group leader, Olga Gomez-Cash, who's here to represent the Green Party, and representing the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, Jenny Hurley. You're all very welcome. Thanks very much indeed for joining me. We thought we'd start by giving each of you 60 seconds uninterrupted to make your pitch to the people of Chorley. Before we started recording, we drew to see who would go first, and that honour this year goes to Alan Cullens. So Alan, whenever you're ready, your 60 seconds are underway.
Thanks very much indeed, Paul. From the Conservative Party, we're under no illusions at all that we can take control of the council. Mathematically, that's not possible. But in any good democracy, there needs to be a strong opposition. And the Conservatives are fielding a set of candidates who are not shy and will not shy away from holding Labour to account. We need to look at issues in the town, such as how they've managed to rack up a £77 million debt. Debt and interest alone being 32. We have events in town like the Flower Show, currently losing 103,000. Well, while we want these events to go on, we have to look seriously for the voters in Chorley and the council taxpayers in Chorley that we can call these to account. We can let people know. Far too much within the council has done what I'd call behind closed doors. It's when meetings have closed, the public have gone, the press have gone, and then they start discussing.
Alan, I've got to be absolutely rigid and cut you off there. I'm afraid your 60 seconds is just up, but thank you very much for that. Jenny, over to you. Right. Your 60 seconds, whenever you're ready, they're underway.
Yeah, I'm Jenny Hurley. I'm standing for the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition here in Chorley this year. We are completely anti-cuts, anti-privatisation, anti-war party. I'll be looking at the new hospital build, which we've been involved with for the last 8 years. We're looking at fewer services, fewer beds, and more private companies coming in. Also, council housing. We need to invest in our people. Council housing, get housing associations out of the market, not-for-profit associations, bring it all back in-house. There's plenty of things to be looking at. Lots of these things, green initiatives, which I can bring in as my job. I'm a buyer and I'm also in the sustainable procurement role. So we need to bring this into Chorley, bring it around, change the narrative.
Perfect timing. Thanks very much, Jenny. Olga, your 60 seconds, whenever you're ready, are underway now.
Thank you. Well, Chorley Green Party are quite a new party. We've been here for 4 years, and I think we've proven ourselves to be listening, understanding and acting on the issues that residents are telling us about. We are hoping to have at least one Green councillor, Chorley's first Green councillor, and to have an independent voice on the council, to hold what will still be a Labour-run council to account, and making sure that complacency doesn't set in. There's lots to be done around the proper maintenance of our green spaces, making sure that the climate change action that is promised in the local plan, we realise that promise, and looking after our public services. I think we all agree we need a new direction, and the Greens across the nation do politics very differently. I'm somebody very pragmatic. I have a long experience in universities of bringing change to committees and task and finish groups, and I think that practical approach to moving
Olga,
things.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Very rude of me, but got to be fair to everyone and stick to the 60 seconds exactly. And Alistair, finally to you, your 60 seconds are underway now.
Under Labour control, Chorley Council provides great value for money, the second lowest council tax rate in Lancashire. A high-performing council will provide excellent services balancing to residents. Labour's attracted hundreds of jobs to the borough, created better health, building 2 doctors' surgeries in Wicklow and East Chorley, cared for our elderly, building supported accommodation, delivering Meals on Wheels service, helped our town and village centres thrive. We've supported young people at the youth zone and its work in the villages. We've invested in affordable housing and adaptation so people can stay in their own homes and avoid getting stuck in hospital. We've opposed the Tory government's crazy demands to build more houses in our communities. Labour's invested £500,000 in our environment, planting thousands of trees, creating wildflower meadows and electric charging points. Despite huge cuts in government funding, Chorley does all this while keeping council tax low, unlike Conservative County Council, who failed to maintain roads and repair the roads, despite taking 75% of council tax. Chorley Labour wants to continue to work hard on residents' behalf and ensure Chorley is a great place to live, work and visit. So please vote Labour on the 2nd of May. Thank you.
Alistair, thank you. And thanks to each of you for your opening. And a few of you mentioned housing there. So I suppose that's as good a place as any to start. And when it comes to planning, Chorley is actually on the government's naughty step at the moment over the number of decisions it's taken to refuse permission for house building on various sites across the borough, which have later been overturned on appeal. So the council's been put into a special category, which allows developers to bypass it altogether and go to a body called the Planning Inspectorate for it to decide where houses should be built in Chorley. Alistair, isn't that a sanction that you've really got to take on the chin? And it's one that's of real detriment to the people of Chorley, isn't it? Because it's cut their local representatives completely out of the picture.
I think the people of Chorley well know what the problem is here. The problem in Chorley is we built Buckshaw Village and we had a massive amount of housing delivered. Therefore, the government's crazy algorithm that works out how you build more houses is put more houses where places have built houses, not where places haven't built houses. We know that. The residents know that. The government won't change its policies. Michael Gove was making a political stunt when he made that designation. He didn't designate Conservative councils apart from Fareham, which he knew would come out very shortly. And we actually can do nothing to change that position. We told the government that. We questioned their numbers, which are false because of the planning appeals in Preston and South Ribble that went a contrary way. We had a memorandum of understanding with Preston and South Ribble, which collapsed because of what those planning inspections. And ultimately, we are all trying very hard to get the local plan in place for the next 15 years. But we are hamstrung yet again by government policy. The government won't accept it. Every government planning minister I've met for the last 5 years has said, we agree with your situation, but we can't change anything. So we are stuck in that situation and cannot unilaterally make the changes the government wants us to do, which is why it's ridiculous, why it's stupid, why it's crazy, and all the other words. But we are working with the government because they came to us last week and said, we are happy to work with Chorley to get them out of special designation, but they won't tell us how to do that. So they said they want to do it, but they can't show us how to do it. It's absolutely crackers. It is a crazy situation. The sooner we get our local plan in place, which will hopefully be early next year, the better. And then we'll be into the new 15-year plan. And we had a meeting yesterday with Preston and South Ribble again to make sure that that's going to happen as soon as possible. We are pushing as fast as we can.
Alan, makes sense to come to you next because it's a charge that Alistair's laid at the government's door, and he's right, isn't he? There is nothing Chorley can do to extricate itself from this situation, and it's being punished for building houses, more houses than it could reasonably expect it to have been building 10 years ago.
There is something they could have done, Paul, and that's very simple, and that was to get the local plan in place. The local plan is now 9 years overdue. Very much around where the thoughts are within Labour in Chorley is very much around we can create a director for property development, we can create a team around that, the team that's trying to put the local plan in place. And I understand why this has happened. You know, there are a shortage of planning experts, but this is well overdue. If we'd had a plan in place, then it was very clear to developers of where those sites are that could be built. The figures would be there. They failed to deliver the plan, and as such, that meant that they've had to overturn a number of developers. People want to come and live in Chorley. Fantastic, you know, and we welcome everybody to Chorley. But there has to be a plan, and that plan has to be in place very, very quickly before those special measures can be removed.
Just for people who don't follow these things quite as closely as we're obliged to, the local plan sort of sets parameters for different sites and that can be built on, and also the number of houses that can be built in somewhere like Chorley over a medium-term period, in your case, 15 years. Olga, just coming to you on this one. Chorley's got more green belt than anywhere else in central Lancashire. There's talk in the draft local plan of the fact that some of that green belt may have to be released, certainly for employment use. That's just a harsh reality, isn't it, that even the Greens would have to accept?
Well, I think, if I can just go over what we've just seen for a moment too, I think that it's very obvious that there is a lot of mediation and a lot of conversation needed for the council and the national government to work together on this issue. We do need homes, absolutely, and it's really important that they're affordable, they're in the places that people need them, etc. And it's also, if we are building homes, that we have a really good strategy around the climate strategy around building those homes. So when we do build them, and if they're needed, that they have all the right environmental assessment criteria, that they're insulated. That could be fantastic for a local economy in terms of building a green economy, creating jobs around making those houses efficient. So there are ways of doing this in a way that is respectful of our planet and our green belt as well.
Jenny, just coming to you, you mentioned council housing in your opening pitch. Apart from at a very small scale, hasn't the council housing ship long since sailed, and there's no way back to it, is there?
There's always a way back to it. I mean, especially considering, we're looking to probably going to be getting a Labour government in the next general election. So your local plans will also then reflect what they are planning on doing. So there is no reason why that funding, if you're confident in your own party, that funding cannot be forthcoming. South Ribble and Preston both have council houses planned. They're in the planning. They're looking to build more. There's no reason why Chorley can't do the same. It'll also take a hold on where those houses are going to be built. You've got a say if the council's actually building the houses where they are. And we keep hearing that we're getting affordable housing. But is it, that a lot of this private development is not affordable to many people? There is a huge gap in the housing market, and especially in the rental market. You can build the houses, you will cover that gap, and you can dictate the green policy on the building of the houses. The big thing is, let's move away from oil, let's move away from gas as much as possible. There is no reason why these houses can't be built and built sustainably for an absolute future for everybody, not just people of Chorley, but for everybody.
Paul, can I just respond to that?
Yeah,
Jenny. We have almost 200 properties at the moment, and the reason we can't go over 200 is the minute we go over 200 properties, and they've all been acquired through the Labour administration, by the way, because there was none when we came in, apart from one, which was a lodge for a park, but let's not go there. Get to 200, the government takes your revenue account off you and penalises you for building houses. So at the moment, we've got £2 million on top of the tens of millions we've already spent on getting those houses that we've currently got in place. We want to spend another £2 million. To spend that and get up beyond that 200 number, we get clobbered financially. That will deliver, £2 million will deliver circa 12 houses at the current build prices for what we need to build, which is family homes, because that's what we're short of at the moment. And that's the problem we've got. So we get clobbered. The housing associations don't, private developers don't. So the government policy takes money off councils for building houses. Now we've got plans to acquire more, but the problem we have is we haven't got the wherewithal. Chorley Council's budget, Jenny, is £14 million a year. £2 million out of that is a huge amount of money. So we are putting every penny we can into housing. We're tending to go for niche housing in terms of specialist housing that other providers don't provide. So that's housing for refugees, older people, people with special needs, because others aren't providing that. But we also have housing associations who I think aren't accountable enough to the residents and the population of our boroughs and need to be. And the way to do that, a bit like the railways yesterday, is to renationalise council housing, take it all back into council so it's run by local people, for local people, and I'd be well up for that in Chorley. What's stopping us is government policy. And I echo Jenny's point. I'd love the Labour Party to adopt that policy and bring that in. And I've been lobbying very hard within the Labour Party, along with a lot of others, to do just that.
Well, on that, just staying with you, Alistair, for a moment, on that £2 million, how are you going to spend it? How can you appeal to the people of Chorley and say you're spending that £2 million well? You mentioned the niche and specialist housing. Is that going to remain the focus out of necessity, or are you looking to broaden things out?
No, as I said, the problem we've got at the moment is because we're seeing an increase in the homelessness across the whole country. It's actually the lowest in Chorley that it is in the whole of Lancashire. I was giving some numbers the other week, the number of councils who've got people in bed and breakfasts and in really unsuitable accommodation. Chorley's is the lowest because we're very lucky to have Cotswold House and other premises where people can stay on a short-term basis. The problem you've got is we've now got pressure because of the increase in homelessness for families to go into Cotswold House, who it's not really designed for. What we need is accommodation for families with 2-3 kids, have garden space where the kids can play out safely and all the rest of it. And that's the kind of accommodation we're looking to acquire. The problem we've got is the minute we identify a site to either build properties or buy the properties, we're gazumped by the private sector because, as everybody knows, Alan made the point, everyone's living in Chorley, house prices are very high in Chorley, and we're competing in the market. And therefore, we have to get good value for our residents. So we've got bids out currently on a number of premises and stroke sites, and we ultimately don't have any land left of our own because, again, we had a programme of working with one of the housing associations, it was CCH then, Jigsaw, to develop housing when we first came in on all the spare plots of council land. We put the land in, they built the houses, and we built circa 80 to 90 properties through doing that programme, which was highly successful, but ate up all our small pockets of land. And we have, I think, one large site left to develop, which there's plans to sort that out.
Well, Alan, the case for council housing very much being made there by Alistair and Jenny. Is that something you agree with? Are you on the same page?
I'm afraid I'm not, Paul, and the very good reason for that is the reason that it ended up with housing associations as the state of housing that was left under councils, and that was right the way across the country. The state they were left in of dilapidation, of ill repair, and that was because councils didn't have the money. And I think you have to increase rents quite tremendously. However, I think we have to come up with something that's a unique solution. If we look in Bristol, for instance, where they've actually created housing out of containers, for homeless people, especially a lot of veterans. And that in itself sounds like prefabs. They're not. They're absolutely first-class homes. So I think we have to work very closely. And I think, as Olga mentioned, we have to look right the way across the county council, across the borough councils, and work with government on unique ways of finding affordable housing for people. And I'm not against, per se, the work that we've done at the moment in the likes of Cotswold House, etc. I think it's fantastic. I think the difficulty is, and why we're in this situation is, can councils be trusted to run housing? And my belief is no, I don't believe they can.
Well, Olga, the local plan that was mentioned a moment ago, when that does eventually come into force, the housing numbers will be weighted against Chorley and towards Preston and South Ribble, who are also partners in this local plan area. It'll be weighted away from Chorley because of its past delivery, certainly for the first few years. But within the next decade, they're still looking at needing to build 434 properties a year, not too far short of the 564 that they're expected to deliver now. What's the Green Party position on that? Is Chorley building or being expected to build too many homes?
Well, I think we know that Chorley has built too many homes, and that is, the situation that we find ourselves in, as we be very clear in how we've discussed it this morning, that there's been a clash of government policy, of local plans, etc. That may change. That may change. We're stuck in that at the moment, but that may change. And as I said before, if we are building lots of houses, we do need places for people to live in, the ones that they can afford to rent and buy. They have to be in places where people need them. There's ways of doing it that are very smart. And we've seen in Lewis Council that the building of new properties has been done completely to new environmental standards in terms of their rating, their certification, the kind of land use, the kind of the kind of management of energy, the transport around it. It's the, if it's a really holistic plan around the housing, around the infrastructure, the transport, the kind of materials that are used, the waste management, it can be a real opportunity to do something of a really high green standard and lead in that way. So I appreciate, that we are in a really complicated situation, but it may change, and there are also opportunities within it.
Just briefly staying with you, Olga, is there not a contradiction in your assessment that Chorley's built too many homes, but people in Chorley still need somewhere to live, and how do you square that circle?
Well, there's also retrofitting what we already have. And that's, that's also a big part of what needs to be looked at. And I don't know the detail yet, but I dare say that, some of the needs for housing can be met by some of the stock that we have, and that we think about retrofitting that too. So, I look forward to the detail of this and working with that. But yes, at the moment we are in a situation where some kind of quite difficult decisions need to be made, but where those houses are and how they were built can be a real opportunity for creating something which is much more respectful of our environment and of the kind of needs that people have too.
Jenny, just finally on this subject to you, on the broader housing issue beyond council housing, what's the Tusk vision? Is Chorley, or has Chorley been building too many, and should it be building significantly fewer in the future?
Well, it has built, a lot proportionally than across the country. It's built an absolutely huge amount. The infrastructure we've got, obviously we haven't got the funding from county level, from government level to keep up with the infrastructure. Schooling, hospitals, GP surgeries being one of them. And we've moved to centralising those services as opposed to having them in the community, the community areas. So it's very, very difficult to do that. And I think Olga did have a good, point there about, the retrofitting. We do have properties round and about, and areas round and about that that can be developed and bought and really, like she says, retrofitted to the highest environmental standards. I mean, I was in facilities management for a long time, and that this rebuilding, it can be done, and it can be done in the most economic way as well. So you're looking at using your infrastructure, your existing infrastructure. You're using existing land. You're not pulling it out there. You're meeting a certain amount of government tick boxes. And I have to disagree with Alan. When you have a higher proportion of council houses, the council can then efficiently look after them. It's only when they were reduced so much by the Conservative government way back when, with the right to buy, and they were all sold off, and you got fewer and fewer council houses, that standard dropped. We are now looking at a substandard from the private sector that are looking just to gain profit. So it would be within the interest of everybody to have a high number of council houses. We need to be able to bring that back in. And I just hope that if we do have a change in government, that these policies are going to pull through. Because if we don't see them, we're just going to be left with the same legacy that the Tories have left us.
Well, going from something that everybody's interested in, housing, to probably something that not a whole lot of people are interested in, which is council finances, but equally important, certainly from all of your perspectives. And Alan, just coming back to you, you were bemoaning the level of Chorley's borrowing there, but if you look at their budget for this year, so much of the stuff they borrowed to invest in is actually keeping day-to-day services afloat. The Market Walk development bringing in £938,000 a year, a logistics house in Buckshaw, £583,000. Where would Chorley Council be without that level of income that they've had to borrow in order to generate?
I think the first thing we have to ask, Paul, is what is the business of the council? And it is to provide some of the statutory services, and we do that very well. I think it's also then looking at, are we a monopoly council? Do we sort of throw the dice, land on a piece of land, and then purchase it? And I think that's the business that Chorley is in at the moment. I mean, as I mentioned in the introduction, £77 million worth of debt, and that's probably going to significantly increase. That is, fortunately, there is something called the Public Sector Works Loan Board, of which the council borrow money from. And they borrow it over a period of 50 or 60 years. So we're saddling future generations with debt. 32% of the spending power is to repay that debt. Now, yes, we do get income, but if then you look at some of the other councils, if you look at Birmingham, you look at Warrington, you know, where they've invested in businesses and they've gone bust, you know, they've really struggled. And I think we're in a scenario whereby we've got to be so careful of what we do. Yes, we do need some level of debt. I don't disagree, but I'm afraid we're heading into stratosphere figures. And I don't think that's the way forward for a council.
Alistair, just you can pick up Alan's point on the debt. I'm sure you'd like to, but just on also the day-to-day spending issue. In a couple of years' time, you're forecasting a £1.3 million deficit. That deficit never seems to be cleared, does it? It's cleared in the immediate term to balance the books, but then it always crops up in the medium term, 2 years hence. Is there not a case for saying that at some point you've just got to say you're breaking even in the medium term rather than just day to day?
The problem has been the money that's come from central government has been cut and cut for the last 15 years. We all know that. We're getting less money. Every council's getting less money, which is why we had a plan of how we were going to replace some of that money by investing in Chorley. So back to Alan's question of what is the council for, we're there to create better health, well-being, wealth for people, so jobs, people's health, people's housing, all the things we've just been talking about. That's what we're using, that almost £3 million of money that we get through the investments into Chorley that other councils don't get. That's over 20% of our budget now comes from those investments. Now, other councils don't have that. Other councils are jealous of Chorley doing that because we use the money that we got from new homes bonus, from borrowing, but what I would say prudent borrowing, a bit like getting a mortgage. So we borrowed some money and we're paying it back every year. We are paying down that mortgage every year. We have most of that borrowing is on repayment terms, so it's repayment plus interest. And even after that's all been done, we're still making over 20% of our budget. That allows Chorley to keep doing the things that people want to see it doing. We can do the good things and the nice things. We're not making cuts. Jenny said in her opening remarks about being anti-cuts. There are no cuts in Chorley. There are savings, yes, because every council has to be more efficient, but we are not cutting staff. We are not cutting services. Other people in Lancashire are. Other people across the councils are. And Alan's point about these councils who've borrowed wildly and invested outside their areas like Warrington, who have invested in shopping centres in Manchester. We've only ever invested in our borough to do two things, to give a benefit to residents and to give a return to the council, to bring in some money. And there was a table the other week that said that Chorley, out of 600 odd councils, was 287th on its risk of borrowing issues. And that was on a risk basis assessment by actuaries, people who know what they're doing in this area. And that isn't, the figure might be high, but Chorley's ability to repay it and its plan to repay it, because these are viable returns that make money year in, year out, year in, year out. So we all, unfortunately, have to get a mortgage at some point in our lives and hope that one day we'll pay it off. We can't do it over 5 years. We have to do it over a longer period. And that's what this council's doing. It's investing in the people of Chorley and confidence in the people of Chorley. And so far, that's been replicated because every investment has delivered both the outputs and the money that we asked it to do.
Just very briefly on the medium term deficit, you say there's no cuts, only savings, but at some point aren't those savings going to have to be enough to clear that deficit? It's easy to blame government funding, but I mean you've got a minimum funding guarantee, haven't you, at the moment, which has brought £1.6 million into Chorley this year. It's not all bad on the funding front, is it?
Well, the health service the other week was a health service meeting where they accepted that the council cuts were the highest amount of local public sector cuts that had been happened over the previous years, because they never cut the police as much, they never cut emergency services as much, they never cut the health service as much, they never cut defence by as much. It's always local government that the governments of all colours come to when they want to save money. That's where they make the trimmings, because they don't see the direct impact. We do. But we have a plan. Yes, we have to make savings. But I sat at the meeting with our Unison union, which represents most of our workers, the other week, alongside Paul Faulkner, leader of South Ribble, and there are no plans in Chorley and South Ribble, as far as we can see ahead, and that is medium term, 3 to 5 years, to cut staff, to cut services, to cut anything, because we've both got the ability to make those savings by restructuring, by changing the way we do things, and by those investments paying off. And South Ribble are doing similar, as are many other councils, including Preston, to basically make councils more sustainable for the future. Because unfortunately, while I am very keen on a Labour government, and I hope that we get more money from a Labour government, I suspect there won't be great times or rosy times for many years to come. And that's tied to the world economy, that's tied to wider issues, not just this country. And it'd have been helpful if we hadn't, or everybody in the country had a cost of living crisis created by the Tory government and Liz Truss's and Kwasi Kwarteng's crazy budget that put all our costs up, principally energy and all the wage bills that we had to do, because everybody was squeezed. So we're in that world, but we will have to make savings at some point, and there may be some difficult decisions about which of those extra things we don't do. But those are the extra, not the core things.
So, sorry to cut across you there, Jenny. Let me just put that point to you. Difficult decisions in the future. Isn't Tusk's position really to dodge those difficult decisions? And you say you're fighting cuts, but isn't it fighting reality? If you've not got the council budget for it, what on earth can you do?
Well, I mean, the point is, we're talking about we're not making cuts, we're making savings. I mean, we've got lots of corporatees here that they are actually, we've seen across the board that these are exactly the same things. We are seeing cuts in things like centralising services. We're seeing lots of cuts within the community on youth facilities, smaller outfits, and this is this has been reinvested as the youth zone, which it's great. I mean, our council at the moment has done really well. I will say this because I've said this to Alistair for a long time. I do appreciate what he's doing there. I just don't agree with the whole form and the way that they're looking at it. They're looking at it purely from a budget perspective. So long term, we now have other services cut, replaced by a one-size-fits-all service. GP surgeries, in Whittle, we've got them fighting for that local service where the provision is there for all the people. Those services could be put into a bigger outfit, part of a huge private sector. Well, I mean, some of these private companies that we're seeing coming over from the US that are taking over the GP surgeries, which is what could happen in Withnell.
But it's beyond the district council.
They don't have the doctors there, so they are cuts.
But it's beyond the district council's powers, control, purview, however you want to characterise it.
I was using them as an example of how they, the youth zone isn't beyond the district councils. The youth example, that isn't beyond, because that is what has been done. The building of these bigger surgeries to remove the smaller ones, it's a different way of working. It is providing fewer GPs for a higher population at the end of the day. So it's these types of cuts that I would like to see addressed. And you can do both. I mean, it's been shown at a national level, the reinvestment in everything. And it is important to find out what is going to happen if we get a Labour government in, because this will reflect on how a Labour council will be allowed to function. So it's, if we're not getting that, if we're being told at the top level, you still can't have the money, then we're going to be told at the lower levels that we still can't have the money. And you've still got to make those cuts. Call them savings if you want, but they're cuts.
I appreciate you using the NHS as an example and the GP surgery. But just briefly, I mean, one of the Tusk policies that you've outlined in your local manifesto is to develop social care pathways. But again, that's something would normally sit at a county level. Is your case actually the districts need to be more heavily involved in areas that they don't traditionally have any role in whatsoever? And how do you go about ensuring that happens, if that is what you believe?
Well, there is. I mean, it's all part to do with the well-being, the preventative services, the leisure centre. There's lots of activities going on there. There's also the social housing that have been said, the care housing. There are also the development of these GP surgeries. these are all part of that health and social care. You can't just split off the health and social care. And county is involved in that. The NHS is involved in that. And also the borough council is involved in that. It's a whole package. You can't just separate them off. It doesn't work that way.
Olga, just coming to you with Chorley's, with the Green Party's hands on the coffers in Chorley, what would you do?
Well, I think we can see that a few, Alistair and Alan and Jenny have all made the point that this is not particular to Chorley, this funding issue. This is not particular even to councils. You know, I work in education. I think in the NHS, we can see that there is something. We have to find quite different new ways of handling the economy. And actually, the financial crisis that we're in is actually a kind of democratic crisis, as well as an environmental crisis, as well as a social crisis. So we have got to be very, very creative. And I think all of the speakers this morning, that they've come up, there's, you know, great ideas about how we might do these things, but we need to put them together into not just an idea here and there, but like a different vision. And, you know, we've seen in Preston that kind of local procurement, that way of creating a circular local economy. There are ways of revitalizing. And of course, a lot of that is, as Jenny said, around making sure that we're putting health and well-being first, and then not incurring those costs afterwards. So I think doing things differently would get us out, and this, you know, business first, everything for, you know, not thinking about our communities first, has got us into certain roads that we can't get out of. And we do need to rethink the economy in terms of making it much more circular, much more within what we can do. And there is a long way out. You know, there's an optimism of where we can get to, but there's also going to be quite a long, and I think Alistair mentioned it, you know, this is going to take a long while of lots and lots of actions in the direction of revitalizing our economy at a very local level, and being very smart with the little money we have until the funding rate, you know, the kind of public funding regime that we've got at the moment, which has not worked. I think we can safely say that changes.
You talk about a different vision there, Olga. I'm sure one of your different visions would encompass the environment as a Green Party representative. So just looking at that issue for a moment, you talk in the manifesto that you've supplied about, you know, investing in green spaces and the like. They're all things that people can sign up to and agree with, aren't they, at a local level? But have you not got a harder, tougher message on the environment for the people of Chorley, that there are certain things that you believe that they would have to swallow for the sake of the environment? Is it not smoke and mirrors to say that it can all be about investing in parks?
Well, investing in parks is a really small part of it. You know, there's also electrifying the fleet. You know, at the moment the fleet in Chorley is going to be renewed in terms of the fleet vehicles. There's ways of making that much greener, much more efficient, much less cost, etc. I mean, there's the initial outlays, obviously. So I mean, this idea, and I think that's quite a pernicious idea, that somehow green policies are things that are bad for us and we have to swallow them. Quite the opposite. They're not just environmental policies, they're social policies. They're about social justice, and they're about making communities thrive. And so my hope would be that we're not talking about anything that people have to swallow and suffer for, but we are actually, it's not just a good idea that costs us money, it's a good idea that creates a very different way of managing. And I think we're seeing that in Lewis Council, for example. We're seeing that in Lancaster, we're seeing that in Brighton, where some councils are able to really turn this tanker around. And so, you know, this idea that that is a very dangerous idea that certain parties put forward, that, you know, these are vicious attacks on our liberties or our money or whatever. Now, you know, the local economy thriving is a positive thing for everybody, I think, as Jenny has articulated very well.
Well, Alan, Olga didn't name party names there, but wouldn't she be talking about the Conservatives as a party that's portraying environmental policies as something, you know, that people might object to and rail against? I mean, even at a local level, the Conservatives have been against bee-friendly bush shelters, and That's about as innocuous as it can get, isn't it? And you were opposed to that.
What we are against is gimmicks, and I'm sorry, bee-friendly bush shelters are expensive gimmicks. We need a much wider plan. We talked earlier about déjà vu in that discussions here. The leader of the Greens last year and I called on the council to have a fully costed plan of how they're going to make net zero by 2030. 12 months on, we're still awaiting that plan. It's not there. I think we have to be realistic whether we can achieve the 2030 targets. I mean, we looked at an option for the council to sign up to the Cities Race for Zero, which would have given a much longer period to 2050. But we are in a scenario whereby climate change is having a significant impact. I think that from a Chorley point of view, we are fully supportive of some of the areas that we're working on currently. But we need to look at our buildings first and foremost. It's going to take a tremendous cost to get them to be carbon neutral or carbon efficient. It's where's that carbon offset going to come from? And those are the plans that we need to see in place. We need to debate those plans and to ensure that they are cost effective, that the council can afford to do them.
Alistair, 5 years on from Chorley declaring a climate emergency and 6 years out from intending certainly the council, although you can clarify this for me, is it the council or the borough being net zero by 2030? There really does need to be more flesh on the bones of how you're going to achieve that, doesn't it?
Both the council and the borough, and part of our role in this is being as a community leader to try to get people to change their behaviours and their habits, and that's what we all need to do. Council can't do it, individuals can't do it. Everybody has to do it. So, and the government particularly.
So the borough by 2030, the borough net zero by 2030. That's impossible, isn't it?
It's not impossible. It's difficult, and it comes back to Alan's point about buildings, particularly old buildings like the town hall. So, and we were, like many councils, affected by the fact that government put a scheme in to help people become carbon neutral, which was massively prohibitive. We were allocated some money from that scheme to spend on the town hall, but the way it was operating was going to cost us more money to do it than not do it. So we have an alternative scheme that we're bringing forward, which is still timetable to deliver by 2030. Whether it does or not, Paul, I can't tell you, because as we all know, retrofitting carbon capture and better carbon features to an old buildings is very, very difficult. So, but you have to work with what you've got and you have to give it the best shot, a bit like a few of the other things we've discussed today. And we will continue to do that because, back to Olga's point, Chorley has invested far, far more than cities like Lancaster on a per capita head in green initiatives and in our climate change programme and our biodiversity programme, etc., because we've got the money to pay for it. And Lancaster hasn't, and that's primarily why. And I've had that conversation with the leader of Lancaster Council. They want to do it, they can't because they haven't got the wherewithal and the money. They're actually cutting. They are making cuts. So we did this by putting a green thread. So we can't do just that green stuff over there. We can't just do the climate change stuff over there. It has to be a green thread, and that's what we did. So every department, every function the council does considers now its contribution to that net zero aim, that climate change aspirations and all the rest of it. And that is done by a committee that monitors that. So, for example, another issue to do with it is air quality. And I know certain parties have gone on about air quality in Chorley. It's actually, now we've done proper monitoring, it's a lot better than it was thought to be. The biggest problems we have in Chorley Borough are the two motorways, the M6 and the M61. They are the biggest polluters. They are the biggest effect on air quality and the biggest problem with carbon, actually, as well. So, but there is very little we can do to close the M6 or the M61 or change the traffic that's going up there. That is a national issue. So we have to work with others. We have to work with the government. We have to work with residents. We have to work with all the different councils to increase all our behaviours. And that comes back to, when we considered at Cabinet, the electrification of the fleet or biodiesel in the meantime, if that's what certain vehicles need, because that's a change that can happen to existing vehicles. All those kind of changes are being done. And that is because we have this green thread going through. It won't be easy. We can all take our view on when it'll be delivered, but I think we can all take the view that the sooner it's done, the better. And the sooner that we stop consuming the planet, the better.
Just very quickly, just answer Alan's point on the plan. Where's the plan?
There is a plan. It's been shared with the Climate Change Working Group, Alan, I'm sure. I saw it. I was at the meeting that they had. I don't know if it's been shared with the full council yet because it's very much a work in progress. And again, there is no point us going out there saying we can do this, that and that by then and then not doing it. We've got to build confidence with residents. We've got to build confidence in residents as well about what we are all doing to achieve that. But the biggest factor, to be quite blunt with you, is the government. And we have the government rowing forward on this and then rowing back on that. So the electric vehicles issue is an example. Nearly every car dealer and, you know, dealers who work for the manufacturers ultimately are immensely annoyed about the government changes its policy. You would think they'd be happy, but they're annoyed because there was a direction of travel going one place and then suddenly they say, oh, we're not doing that, we're going back the other way. Well, what kind of message does that send to anybody?
Well, Jenny,
it's not the example we need to be setting.
Jenny, just coming to you, what is the Tusk message on climate and the environment? Is it one of the party's priorities?
Yes, certainly. I mean, it's, you know, it will, as Olga said, you know, bring complete social change to residents of Chorley as well. And it can be done economically in some ways. You know, there are lots of things, smaller things that can be done, that can be brought in. As I said, I work in procurement, and we're part of the sustainability team. So we're looking at implementing, and this is from a firm that hasn't really grasped the bull by the horns, shall we say. So they really did start a few years ago, well, quite a few years ago, you know, from the bottom up doing this, and they're moving forward quite well. Of course, that's a private firm with lots of money, so they're able to move a little bit faster than local government. But you know, there's also, I mean, the big thing that we've got to do is move away from gas and oil generally, as a nation, as a world. It's one of the biggest polluters, and it's what we need to move away from. So some of those investments into those buildings that are costing the most would be a move away, to try and move away from that. There are now so many initiatives where you can actually earn money from making your own energy. You know, there's so many solar panels and wind devices now that can be put in at quite a low cost these days, that can actually bring back some of that investment into those buildings. So where, you know, we're being told that it's too costly to do this and it must be done efficiently, again, invest in that and it will bring you returns in the long term. You know, it can be done so easily. And I do have to say, you know, things like installing solar panels on government property, you know, they say on car parks and things as well, when they've got the roof, things like that, they do generate then that little bit of money back into the council to reinvest into those buildings and into the green initiative. And you would get that more than you would, although I love the bee bush shelters, you do get more bang for your buck off, you know, more efficient measures. But it's a very, very good start. There is a lot that I can input into it. Looking at your supply chain is another issue. You can really, really knock it down. And things like your digital input, you can actually it's very simple and cheap to check your digital green output that you've got, because that is one of the huge areas that is developing, that is a problem with green issues. You know, I mean, I'd like to bring all these things to council. You know, I'm doing it in my work day. There's no reason why that can't be brought to work alongside the initiatives that are already going.
Well, believe it or not, we're running almost out of time. So just to end with, I just wanted really to ask each of you to put one, at the very most, two ideas that you think would make Chorley a better borough, and something that say your political opponents here aren't doing, something that gives you a unique selling point. So we'll stay with you, Jenny. And what would your let's make it one, looking at the clock, let's make it one thing to make the borough better, and everyone else feel free to chip in with with your thoughts on each of the suggestions.
Well, aside from bringing, you know, my workday things into council for the green issues, I've been working a long time on the cuts in the NHS. We do have an input into it as a borough. We do have services that, you know, we do provide that can go into it. Things like the new hospital programme. We've been working on this for 8 years as part of the campaign for Chorley Hospital. And now have, working on that, we now have a direct link with our integrated care board and the new hospital programme that we meet on a regular basis. And we also have a contact with NHS England on the general bits that the local issues can't change. So we do have a voice right up there to speak about those issues. Less cuts for Chorley.
But you have their ear, just briefly, on the NHS. We
do have. I had a private meeting with Cheryl from NHS England the other day, and we're looking to get groups in to speak about the issues in the services and what they're putting forward. There's things like virtual wards. They're putting that in. It's initial studies have shown that they cost 4 times than providing an actual bed. You need more staff that we haven't got. So all these issues, they're now listening to us and they're having that conversation with us. We'd like to be able to put that forward from a council view.
Alistair, your unique selling point for Labour?
I want the county council to give us Chorley control of the highways, repairs and maintenance, because potholes are an absolute shambles in Chorley. And I would also like Alan to explain why Chorley, of the 7.2 million when they cancelled HS2 that's come to Lancashire, not 1 penny is coming into Chorley, given the state of our roads. So why is Chorley being disadvantaged against the rest of the county? Give us back control of our highways. We'll do a better job of it and we'll do it properly, because it's quite evident out there it's not being done properly at the moment.
So you'd really want to take on that responsibility, that poison chalice of
highways? We couldn't do it any worse, could we, Paul? It is an absolute shambles.
My face is completely impartial and impassive, as you would appreciate.
And why is none of that money that's going to the rest of Lancashire coming to Chorley? Are we being victimised because we're too Labour? Are we being victimised because we're not in the centre of things in Preston or in Lancaster or wherever? Why are we not having that money? Where's it being spent? And where's the accountability? There isn't any, and it's symptomatic of a two-tier working system that doesn't work. And we've heard that all the way through this as well. But that's another debate for another day, probably.
Just sticking with potholes, just for a second, as somebody has taken far too much of an interest in this subject than is probably healthy. Chorley is getting resurfacing money, pre-planned resurfacing money. Just this particular pot, which is reallocated HS2 money, the model hasn't decided, and it's a model that the county council would say it sticks to precisely to ensure that there's an increase in the standard of roads across the board. The model hasn't said that Chorley should get a particular element of the overall pothole and resurfacing. Well, you are getting schemes. It's not the model.
The model is wrong. Just drive from the M61 motorway into the centre of Chorley on the bypass, and if you're in an ambulance going to the hospital, you'll be shaken to bits before you get there. That is not acceptable in the 21st century in a first world country. That is not acceptable. Something needs to be done. It needs to be done at the very top in the government. It needs to be done in county council, and it needs to be done on the actual roads. And we saw a programme a few years ago that was working, that from the county council. It's patently not working now. And therefore, I hope residents bear that in mind when they go to vote next week against those Conservatives who are propping up the county council and the government and making an absolute mess of our roads.
Well, Alan, I always like to keep other authorities out of this, but as you are a member of Lancashire County Council and a member of the ruling Conservative group, feel free to answer Alistair's particular point on that if you would like, although don't feel obliged, and also your unique selling point to the people of Chorley as well.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm more than happy to respond to this. There is a system whereby, and I'm partly going to agree with Alistair on the idea of how funding actually works is very strange. There is something called the TAMP, which I'm not going to go into detail of that, but that money will be lost. That money comes down from government and it is a very significant amount of money, so for £20 million. And they dictate by a formula which roads should actually be not just resurfaced, but when new road schemes actually come in. If Chorley decide to go on their own on this one, that money will be lost. It has to be a collective way across the county. So it wouldn't be more money coming into Chorley, it'd be actually less money coming into Chorley. I wholeheartedly agree with the state of our roads are a shambles right the way across the country. Many reasons for this. I think you will see a lot of activity over coming months that will improve those roads, and certainly from the Harwood Hall around the hospital and roundabouts, the weather has not helped. But I'm not going to go too into that. That's another conversation. I think you will see a lot more money coming into Chorley from road surfacing and road schemes over the next 12 months.
Your policy to make your one policy to make the borough better?
My one policy to make and it's our red line, and it's been our red line for many, many years, and that's we will protect our green spaces. That we don't want to see any development in the green belt, whether that be for housing, whether that be for industry. It's a red line for us. We will protect our green spaces.
Olga, finally to you, your one policy, is that the sound of Alan and the Conservatives stealing your green clothing there, or have you got something else that you can offer?
Everybody's got a little bit of green. That's the great thing, because and we bring it together in a much more holistic way. But I'll go back to something that Alistair said. He mentioned about that we've been pressing the council about air pollution for a while. We've been pressing the council about their climate emergency strategy, etc. And I think that we've been doing that outside of the council. And I don't deny all the great things that the council has done. And Alistair himself said that we've been on their toes, we've been keeping them on their toes, and I think that's what we would like to do, just to make sure that those grand promises do come into reality, and that we're bringing that fresh, that challenging voice to the council. So if we've done that outside the council, imagine how much more we could do within it. Thank you.
And that is all we've got time for. Don't forget, polling day is on Thursday, the 2nd of May. I'm sure you won't if you've been interested enough to spend the last hour with us. But do remember, if you're voting by post, then your ballots have to be back in time for election day itself. So thank you very much indeed to my guests, Jenny Hurley, Olga Gomez-Cash, Alistair Bradley and Alan Cullens. And to you, however you're voting, or whether or not that's changed in the last 60 minutes, thanks very much for watching. Bye-bye.